Hey, Mark.
Hello, David. How you doing?
Better than you. So, word has it that you have some good stories about when you were a cab driver in New York City instead of here in Arizona, in the desert.
All
Yeah.
right. So, would all your students like to hear a great story about New York taxi driver?
I don't know, would they? Go ahead.
All right.
Let's see how good it is.
Well, when I was 19 years old, I moved from a little small town of about 5,000 in the hills in western Massachusetts to New York City and got a job driving a taxi cab. And one day, when I was driving, I drove in the evening. I started about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon and would drive until 2 or 3 in the morning. And one morning about 2 a.m., I was on the Lower East Side of New York in the Greenwich Village, the East Village. And it had been raining, and I had a taxi cab that was designed so that the windows were curved inward at the top. So if the windows were open even just a smidgen, just a little bit, rain would come in. And so while it was raining, you had to keep the windows up. But if the windows were kept up, then all the windows got foggy and you couldn't see. So as soon as it stopped raining, you'd roll the windows down, which I did that night. And I'm driving in the East Village, and I hear a guy whistle to get me to stop, and I stop. And a hand reaches in and pulls up the lock and jumps in the passenger seat and takes a gun out of his, or holds a gun towards me, puts it on his lap and points it towards me and says...
A gun?
A gun, a pistol, a handgun.
Oh, man.
And says to me, "You know anybody who wants to buy this?" And I looked at him and I went, "No." And he looked completely surprised by my answer. And he said, "You know what this is?" And I said, "What?" He says, "This is a stick-up." And I said, "Well, I figured that." So he said he told me to drive him up to the Bronx, which was uptown, about 6 miles from where we were. So I had to drive him about 6 miles with his gun pointed at me. And all the while, he threatened me, but I had taken a course in psychology, so I figured I could psychoanalyze this guy. So I said to him, "Well, I bet you probably were angry at your father and wanted to kill him, didn't you?" And he looked at me like, how could I possibly know that? And he was a young kid, too. He was only about 16 years old. And so I got him to be a little bit nicer to me, and he said that if I rolled my windows up, he would put his gun away. But I knew that if I did that, he probably wouldn't, and I would be safer if I had the window open, because it'd be harder for him to do anything bad to me if I had the window down. So I drove him along the highway, which is called the East Side Highway, which goes up the East River on the east side of Manhattan up to the Bronx. And we drove by a police station, and he started getting very, very, very nervous. But once we passed the police station, he got much more comfortable, and we got into a housing project, and that's where he lived, somewhere near there. And he told me to stop, and I stopped. And all I had with me when I was driving was the bottom part of a shoebox, which I used to hold a taxi driver's guide, which would say, if someone asked to go to a certain place, I could look it up and see what streets it was located at.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I see the battery light flashing, so you're going to have to talk a little faster.
It's too long a story. I can't talk to you, but you have to do the rest of it after you charge your battery. So, so anyway, and in the housing project, there was no tree growing, no blade of grass, nothing living. It was after 2 in the morning. There was nobody on the street, no person, no dog, no living thing, plant or animal. And he threatened he would kill me. He took everything I had, took my watch, took my pen, took everything, took the few dollars I had with me because I had them, and left. He said, "Don't turn around or I'll kill you." So I sat there and waited, and then when I finally looked around, saw he was gone, so I started to drive back. So as I was driving back, I got out of the housing project, I'm driving back, and I saw a guy who was who waved me down because he wanted to ride, and I picked him up. And he was an older guy, and I got a chance to tell him my story, and he just listened. And I drove back to the taxi company, and I turned the car in, and I told the guy who you normally turn your money into that I'd been robbed, and I had to beg him for 50 cents to take this for the subway to get home. So he gave me the 50 cents. So then I walked to the subway. The subway was about 6 blocks from where the taxi company was. It was near Times Square in New York City. And I walked to the subway, and I got in the subway and went up where I lived to the 125th Street stop on the west side, Broadway and 125th, which is right at the edge of Harlem. And I got out of the subway. Now we're about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I walk out, and there's a couple of guys just hanging out there by the subway station. So I start walking the block, 2 blocks back to 123rd Street where I lived, and I heard some feet walking behind me. So I walked faster, and then the sound of the steps went faster. So I walked faster, and the sound of the steps went faster even then. So then I broke out into a run, turned the corner, ran down the street, and then a guy just grabbed me, and I dropped my shoebox and book, which is all I had left from the first robbery. And I said, raised my hand and said, I don't have any money. I'm a cab driver, and I already got held up tonight. And he said, what'd you say? And I said, I'm a cab driver. He said, you said you're a cab driver? And I said, yeah. And he said, and you already got held up tonight? And I said, yeah. And he said, gee, sorry to hear about that. And he bent down, picked up my box and book, handed it to me, and he walked away. And then I turned and I looked, and I was standing right in front of my apartment door. And that's the story of being robbed twice in one night.
Oh, excellent story.